I came home on a random Tuesday afternoon, nothing special, just thinking about dinner, maybe catching up on emails, and then I saw it. Bright, screaming yellow lines, fresh paint, cutting straight across my driveway like someone had decided my property was suddenly a public parking lot overnight. Not faded, not old. No, this was fresh. Still glossy, still smelling like chemicals. And the worst part? Those lines didn't just stop at the curb. They kept going 6 feet past it, onto land I've owned for over a decade. Yeah, let that sink in. No notice, no letter, no vote, no passive-aggressive HOA email pretending to kindly inform residents. Just paint. Just bold, unapologetic paint like someone had made a decision about my property without even bothering to include me in the conversation. I just stood there for a second, keys still in my hand, staring at it, trying to process whether this was some kind of mistake, or if someone had really just crossed a line, literally and legally. And here's the thing about me. I don't react fast. I don't yell. I don't storm into offices or start filming TikToks. I slow down. I look closer. I get quiet. Because usually, when something doesn't make sense, there's a reason, and I like finding it. So I walked inside, grabbed my file drawer, and pulled out something most people forget exists after closing day, the original plat map. Yeah, the boring paperwork nobody reads. Except me. I rolled it out on the kitchen counter, lined up the lot boundaries, grabbed a tape measure, and walked right back outside. 1 measurement. 2 measurements. 3. Same result every time. Those lines. Not even close. Not even debatable. They were deep inside my property line. I snapped photos. Close-ups, wide angles, measurements visible, time-stamped. If someone wanted to argue this later, I wasn't going to rely on memory. Then I made a call to the county land records office, requested a certified copy of my deed, because if this was going where I thought it was going, I wanted everything airtight. Now at this point, I still gave them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was a contractor mistake. Maybe someone misread a boundary, but then I remembered where I live. Cedar Ridge Estates. Sounds peaceful, right? Yeah, until you realize the HOA board there treats minor authority like it's federal jurisdiction. So I checked the calendar. Next board meeting was 2 days later. Perfect. I showed up early, sat through 15 minutes of discussions about mailbox paint colors and lawn height violations, and then they called my name. I walked up, calm, polite, papers in hand, laid everything out, measurements, photos, plat map. I explained it simply. These lines extend onto my private property. They need to be removed. That's when the HOA president, guy named Richard Halpern, late 50s, the kind of man who smiles like he's already decided you're wrong, leans back in his chair, barely glances at the documents, and says, "That strip is designated shared access. The board has full authority to mark it as needed." I blinked. Not because I was confused, but because I realized something right there. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. I pointed to the map again, explained where the legal boundary sits, even offered to walk it with them if needed. He didn't even lean forward. Just slid a piece of paper across the table toward me like he was closing a deal. "You've placed an obstruction on common use space. There's a $200 fine." I looked down at it. A fine. For my own driveway. I actually laughed, quietly, but enough for the room to shift a little. You ever have one of those moments where everything suddenly becomes very clear? Not louder, just clearer. I folded that paper once, slipped it into my pocket, and nodded like I understood. Because in a way, I did. I understood exactly what kind of situation this was. And more importantly, I understood exactly who they thought they were dealing with. And that's when it hit me, not emotionally, not angrily, just precisely. They had no idea what I do for a living. Now let me pause the story for a second, because this is where things get interesting, not just emotionally, but structurally, like how these situations even happen in the first place. See, a lot of HOAs operate in this gray zone where confidence replaces competence, and authority gets stretched just far enough that most homeowners won't push back. According to standard procedure, an HOA can regulate common areas, shared access roads, and sometimes even aesthetic elements on private property. But, and this is a big but, they cannot redefine legal property boundaries. That's not a board decision thing. That's a recorded, county-level legal fact. From a legal perspective, what they did, painting markings onto privately owned land without consent, can qualify as trespass and even property defacement, depending on the jurisdiction. And here's where most people get trapped. This is a psychological trap. The fine, the tone, the setting of a formal meeting. It's all designed to make you feel like you're already in the wrong, like you've missed some rule buried in a 40-page HOA handbook. Most people second-guess themselves at that point. They comply, they pay, they repaint, and the HOA learns that it can keep pushing. But the reality is, HOAs rely heavily on perceived authority, not absolute authority. And if you don't know where that line is, they will happily draw it for you. So yeah, that meeting ended the way those meetings usually do. Quiet tension, a couple people avoiding eye contact, Richard sitting there like he'd just checked another box, and me walking out with a $200 fine in my pocket and a very clear plan forming in my head. No arguments, no raised voices, just silence. And that silence? That's usually where the real decisions get made. I got back home that night, didn't even turn on the TV, didn't scroll my phone. I sat down at my desk, pulled out everything I had: plat map, photos, measurements, notes, and then I opened my laptop and started writing. Not an email, not a complaint, a document. Clean, structured, deliberate. Because here's the part they didn't know. I've been a licensed surveyor for 19 years. Not the kind who just measures fences and calls it a day. I've certified boundary lines for county courts. I've resolved easement disputes between municipalities. I've testified under oath as an expert witness when property lines turned into full-blown legal battles. This wasn't new to me. If anything, it was familiar. And maybe that's why I didn't feel angry. I felt focused. By the time I finished drafting everything, it was close to midnight. I had outlined the encroachment, cited the recorded boundary, referenced the unauthorized alteration, and made it very clear. This wasn't a disagreement. This was a violation. I sent 2 emails before going to bed. One to a certified survey crew I've worked with for years, another to a property attorney who owed me a favor or two. No long explanations, no emotional language, just facts, attachments, and one line. I need this handled tomorrow. 8 a.m. sharp. I'm standing in my driveway with a coffee in one hand, watching a survey truck pull up like clockwork. No drama, no hesitation, just professionals doing what they do. Tripods go up, instruments calibrated, markers laid out. If you've never seen a certified survey happen in real time, it's almost surgical. Every measurement is deliberate, every angle confirmed, everything documented. By 9:15, they had it. Clean, undeniable. The legal boundary line, marked, staked, photographed, logged. And just to make things extra official, I signed off on the certification myself. Because yeah, I'm licensed to do that. Meanwhile, my attorney had already filed a formal complaint with the county, trespass and property defacement, backed by certified survey data, timestamped evidence, and professional verification. Not a warning, not a threat, a filing. And here's where timing becomes everything. I checked the HOA schedule again, monthly open session, 10 a.m. Same room, same table, same people. So at 9:30, I made one more call to a power washing company. Booked them for 10 o'clock on the dot. When they asked what needed to be cleaned, I just said, unauthorized paint on private property. They didn't ask questions. They just showed up. 9:55. The HOA board is settling into their seats. Papers shuffling, small talk. That same routine energy. 10:00. Right on cue, the sound of a truck outside. Not loud, but noticeable. A few heads turn. Then the low hum of a pressure washer kicking on. Steady, mechanical, impossible to ignore. I didn't rush. I walked in calmly, took a seat in the back like any other homeowner, and waited. You could feel it shift in the room. Curiosity, confusion, irritation. Richard glances toward the window, frowns slightly, then tries to continue the meeting. Agenda item 1, budget adjustments, but nobody's really listening anymore. Because outside, those bright yellow lines, they're disappearing. Slowly at first, then completely. Water cutting through paint like it was never supposed to be there in the first place. One of the board members leans over, whispers something. Richard finally stands up, walks to the window, and just freezes for a second. Not dramatic, just still, like his brain is trying to catch up to what his eyes are seeing. Then he turns, sharp this time, and walks straight out the door. A couple others follow. I give it a few seconds, then I stand up too. By the time I step outside, The crew is already halfway done. Clean lines where the paint used to be. No damage. No overreach. Just precise removal, within the exact boundary that had been staked less than an hour earlier. Richard walks up to them, already mid-sentence. "You can't just," and the crew lead cuts him off, calm as anything. "We're operating on private property, sir. Fully documented." And then, I hand him a copy. Certified survey. Signed. Filed. Along with the notice of legal action already submitted that morning. He looks at it. Really looks this time, and you can see it. That shift. That moment when confidence drains out and reality steps in. Because now it's not a discussion anymore. It's evidence. It's record. It's liability. And here's the thing, they couldn't stop it. Not legally. Not practically. Because everything happening in that moment was within my boundary, backed by documentation they couldn't argue against without putting themselves in deeper trouble. By 10:45, it was done. Every line gone. Surface restored. No trace left except damp concrete, and a very different kind of silence. The kind that follows when something doesn't go the way you expected, especially when you were so sure you were in control. The next few weeks? Quiet. No emails. No warnings. Just silence again. But this time, it wasn't uncertainty, it was processing. About 3 weeks later, I get a letter. Not a fine. Not a notice. A formal statement. The $200 penalty? Rescinded. The project manager responsible for authorizing the paint job? Removed. And their insurance carrier? Reviewing a claim totaling $9,600. Survey costs, legal fees, surface correction. They settled within 45 days. No meeting. No argument. Just signatures. And today, my driveway looks exactly the way it did before any of this started. Same concrete. Same edges. Same quiet little apron leading up to my garage. Except now, there are boundary stakes. Subtle. Official. Certified. Filed with the county. Permanent in a way that paint will never be. And every time I pull in, I see them. And I remember how fast things can shift when someone assumes you won't push back, and how much faster they shift when they realize you can. So what's the takeaway here? Because yeah, this isn't just about some yellow paint on a driveway. This is about something way more common than people realize. It's about what happens when authority goes unchecked in small, everyday systems. HOAs, committees, boards, places where the rules feel official enough that most people don't question them, but not official enough to always be right. And look, I get it. HOAs exist for a reason. They maintain order, protect property values, keep neighborhoods from turning into chaos. In theory, that's the deal. But in practice, things get blurry. Power gets personal. Decisions get rushed. And sometimes, like in my case, someone stops asking, "Do we have the right to do this?" and starts assuming the answer is always yes. The lesson here is, you don't have to match that energy with anger. You don't have to argue louder, or threaten, or turn it into a spectacle. What actually works, what really shifts the outcome, is clarity. Knowing exactly where your rights begin, where theirs end, and having the patience to prove it. Because most overreach doesn't survive contact with documentation. It survives confusion. It survives hesitation. It survives that moment where you think, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I missed something. That's the moment people lose ground, literally and figuratively. And that's why I say this all the time, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. I didn't win this because I reacted quickly. I won it because I reacted correctly. I measured. I verified. I documented. I let the process do what it's designed to do. From a legal perspective, the strongest position you can be in is the one that doesn't need emotion to defend it. Facts don't escalate. They don't get flustered. They don't forget what happened 2 weeks ago. They just sit there and wait for someone to challenge them. And when they're solid, that challenge doesn't last very long. Now there's also a psychological side to this, because what the board did wasn't random. This is a psychological trap a lot of people fall into. When someone presents authority confidently, especially in a formal setting like a board meeting, it triggers this automatic response where we assume they must know something we don't. We shrink a little. We second guess. We comply. And most of the time, that works in their favor. But here's the flip side. Confidence without backing collapses fast when it meets someone who actually understands the system. And when it does, it's not loud. It's not dramatic. It just ends. Quietly. Efficiently. And usually with paperwork. So if you're dealing with an HOA or any kind of governing body, and something feels off, don't jump straight to fighting. Start with understanding. Pull your documents. Read your plat. Check your deed. Ask questions that force clear answers. According to standard procedure, anything that affects property boundaries should be documented, recorded, and verifiable. If it's not, that's your first red flag. And if they try to pressure you into quick compliance, fines, warnings, deadlines, that's usually not strength. That's urgency used as leverage. Take your time. Build your position. Because once you do act, it should be decisive. And here's something else people don't talk about enough. Resolution doesn't always look like victory speeches and apologies. Sometimes it looks like a quiet letter in the mail, a policy change that isn't announced, a person quietly removed from a position. That's how systems correct themselves when they realize they've gone too far. Not publicly, but effectively. My driveway. It looks the same as it always did. No dramatic transformation. No visible reminder of what happened, except those boundary stakes. And I left them there on purpose. Not as a warning. Not as a statement. Just as a fact. Something real. Something recorded. Something that doesn't change depending on who's sitting at a table making decisions that day. Because at the end of all this, that's really what matters. Not who was louder. Not who had the title. Just what was true. So yeah, I'll ask you this. Have you ever had an HOA, or anyone, really, step over a line they weren't supposed to? Not just physically, but in that subtle way where they assume you won't push back? What did you do? Did you fight it, ignore it, or just go along with it because it felt easier in the moment? I'm genuinely curious, because these stories, they happen more than people think. And the more we talk about them, the clearer those invisible lines become.